In this video, I am going to explain how I constructed the rustic rural primitive barn pendant lights that I am installing in the barn that I'm renovating. I decided to build the lights rather than buy lights because the cost of pendant lights was just too high. I started with a Barron's 1 bushel galvanized tub, and I drilled a hole in the bottom of the tub that was about 1/2 inch in diameter, large enough to accommodate the chassis punch that I'm going to use to put a 1-inch hole in the bottom of the tub. So this is a Greenlee 1-inch chassis punch, and what you do is after you remove the cutting half of the punch is to insert the 1/2-inch bolt through the hole that we've cut, and then thread the cutting half of the chassis punch onto the threaded bolt. And then take a 7/16 end wrench and start tightening the fine threaded bolt, which will slowly pull the two halves of the punch together, pulling the cutting half of the punch through the galvanized tub. And when it pops out, you've got a nice even 1-inch hole in the bottom of the galvanized tub. The socket that I chose is a Leviton 10051. I chose this because it has threads in the back for 1/2-inch rigid conduit. Start by taking the socket apart. There are 2 small screws inside the socket, and once those are loosened, you can separate the 2 halves of the socket to make the wiring connections. Take it apart and we see that it has 2 connection points. The brass screw is, by convention, the plus or positive or hot connection, and the silver is the neutral or minus or cold connection. To make sure that the wires don't fray when I start to tighten them down under the connection, under the contact screws, I'm going to tin the ends of my stranded copper wire. In my project, I'm using all THHN stranded copper, and tinning involves putting a bit of solder on the strands of the copper wire. I'm also using 12 gauge wire, which is a little overkill for this project, but then I can put high wattage bulbs into my fixtures. And the 12 gauge wire is hard to manage under those little screws, so after tinning it, take a pair of needle nose pliers and then bend it into a J so it'll fit well around those little contact screws. Trim it up a little bit. And now we're ready to make our connections. So we put our tinned copper wire. I always, by habit, start with the neutral. Make it nice and snug around the contact screw. And we'll go ahead and tighten this screw down. We'll snug it down for now and then give them another one more little turn before we assemble the light. All right, So there's the neutral side done. I've got a little piece of black tape on the other wire indicating that it's going to be the hot wire. Made my curved end, threaded it under the screw, tighten it down. Make sure everything's good and snug. Last little bit of torque to make sure everything stays nice and snug once the current starts to flow. Careful not to over tighten, you don't want to crack the porcelain socket. Make sure everything looks good, no bare wires touching. And now we attach the socket to the base by re-tightening those little set screws. And there's what it looks like, all completed. Actually already on the stem. But we're going to pull the wire, we're going to take that off the stem now and pull the wire back through the stem so we can get ready to mount it onto our bucket. So I'm using 1/2-inch rigid conduit. I've cut my stems, my pendants 3 feet long, threaded on both ends. I'm going to first install a 1/2-inch electrical lock nut. This will keep the socket and the galvanized tub all nice and firm and rigid on the stem. I'm going to add a really big washer. And we'll thread the pipe through the hole in the bottom of our tub. Now I'm going to thread the wires through the 1/2-inch conduit. Now we're ready to tighten up the socket. Onto the 1/2-inch conduit. Nice and snug. We'll go back and tighten this up with a wrench later, but there is our completed hanging pendant light. Leads actually a little too long, but hanging out of our pendant of the stem. Light fixture now ready to hang. The way I've installed these in my barn is I then put them into a junction box with a lock nut on top of the junction box, connect them all together, and you can see they make a nice source of light. And once I get some half silvered bulbs installed, then the light won't be so harsh and direct in the down, but will be more reflective.